Welcome to the Husker247 Hoops Cast. I'm Brian Christopherson. I'm joined by Michael Brunts to bring some brains to this whole operation. Shaking his head no, but it's true. This is fun, Brunts. It's madness time. Nebraska is actually part of the madness. We're gonna road trip it to Memphis, where the Huskers will play on Friday at 5:50 Central on TNT against Texas A&M. Yeah, of course that was what it was.
Yeah.
What do you think of the committee's attempt at humor there? Kind of, I don't know if it went over as well as they wanted. Maybe in some parts it did. Maybe not as much around here.
Yeah, I think after the initial oh, look who they're playing, after that wore off, it was kind of like, okay, this is an unnecessary side. It's a sideshow, and it's like, as much as the committee says they don't pay attention to that stuff, they do. They absolutely do. You don't have Nebraska and A&M playing in both the men's and the women's brackets just by chance.
Yeah.
There's ways that you could have avoided that. And I mean, there's three people with Nebraska ties somewhat on the selection committee. I mean, everybody knows what's going on. Everybody gets it. And it's unfortunate because it kind of takes away from the fact that Nebraska gets their 10 seconds to celebrate, and then blammo, you're playing A&M, and you could see it on everybody's faces. They knew what the storyline was. It's too bad, but that they know what they're doing. They know.
In fairness, because I'd kind of been throughout the week, I'd been on a couple shows where people were entertained by the idea of it, and so it was kind of an amusing thought at one point in my head. My initial reaction was sort of a ha, and then I went back and I was like, nah, it's not that funny.
No.
Joke didn't age well after 15 seconds to me. But anyway, yeah, I think what the committee should have got together and compared notes and said, who's going with the joke, because both of us can't do it. It's like somebody came on stage right after the other one, was like, oh, did you hear this one? And it's like, yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Anyway,
it's too bad.
I will say this. So Fred Hoiberg and Josiah Alec and Rink Mass come up right afterward. And of course they get asked about that part, and we can move on then quickly. But my point is, I don't think Alec and Mass and those guys give much of a care about it, honestly. I don't think it's going to actually be a distraction to the team. Do I think it's going to be talked about more than it should be when the game can be the focus? Yes. But I believe the team when they were initially talking immediately about Alec and Mass, A&M, and their rebounding prowess, and stuff like that. And I think they get so inside the box, on what they got to do in a particular matchup, that all the other stuff is just sort of floating out there. And yeah, you see it on social media a bit, but I think maybe that storyline, even after the first 24 hours, kind of played out a little bit. We'll see if the Alberts thing, is still a deal in Memphis for a little bit with some of the writers there. But I like the matchup. Let's get into that.
Yeah.
Nebraska against Texas A&M, who can rebound the heck out of it. They're the number one offensive rebounding team in the country. They get 42% of their misses, but they also miss a lot. So that's the thing. They shoot less than 40% from the field, just under 40%, where Nebraska shoots 45%. So Nebraska's a better shooting team, but the big challenge here, Bruns, is going to be, can the Huskers keep A&M off the offensive glass? And in particular, Anderson Garcia, 6'7", senior, who's basically the best rebounder in the country, maybe one of them, gets 4.5 offensive boards per game, gets almost 10 total per game. So they got to do a job on him.
It's an interesting match. Very rarely do you have both sides of a matchup being this is a good matchup for us, and I felt, just kind of reading from the A&M side of things, I mean, they feel like they have a pretty pronounced advantage on the glass, which statistically they do. They've had better guard play of late. They got on a nice run toward the end of the season and basically kind of played their way in. And from the Nebraska side, you're looking at just how many 3-pointers and how much perimeter offense A&M gives up. And you're saying, okay, if we can make some shots, when we've got a chance to kind of run away with this thing. And so the 8-9 matchups always, I guess, kind of, the teams are seated close. They're, supposed to be a pretty tight matchup. But I was just struck by how the narratives on both sides are very much like, okay, this is a good matchup for us. And to me, that just says, like, basically whichever team's able to dictate what kind of game it is, they're probably going to come out with a win.
Well, you can also see it from the other side, where if you just like, who we playing? Oh, Nebraska. They haven't ever won an NCAA game. Like, all right, let's see how that goes. I think if Nebraska is even close to the best version of itself, it wins. Like, it's just a matter of if they're hitting shots or not. I really believe that, because I think this team, when they play well, I actually think they're more like a 5 seed or something like that, like when they play really well. And I thought, like, in the last portion of the season, yes, the schedule was lighter for the Huskers, but winning 7 of the last 9, I thought they were playing with more intensity on the defensive end. They'd kind of figured out what they wanted to be there, and the way they were crashing with their doubles and the way they just were all over the place. It was going really well until the second half against Illinois, which of course scored 58 points in the last 20 minutes. If I were to look at that game and excuse it a little bit for Nebraska, I thought Terrence Shannon is so gifted at, like, knowing how to draw contact. And I'm not even going to get into a discussion about the officials, whatever, but he's good at it. He's always has been all year. Like, he's going to get to the foul line. And what he did, Bronson, that game with about 17 minutes left, they're down, and he just starts getting to the hoop, drawing fouls, and it really disrupted the flow of the game. Kind of turned it into a stop and start kind of game for a bit. And I thought Nebraska got out of its flow because of him. And so that's what it comes down to in March sometimes. There'll be like a specific individual on another team who does something that sort of just like wedges into a weakness you may have, or it causes a problem for you for 15 minutes in that game, and that's all she wrote. So I thought that was the case on Saturday with Illinois. We'll see if A&M has somebody like that. Maybe it is Anderson Garcia or somebody, and he has 16 rebounds, and that's the story at the end of the night. But Nebraska is obviously going to be scouting and thinking about that very hard. And interestingly, Ernie Ziegler, the assistant coach for Nebraska, actually coached Garcia when he was both were at Mississippi State previously. So that's kind of an interesting side note.
Who needs to have a big game in your mind in this one for Nebraska?
Josiah has got to be like that dude he's been the last few weeks. He's become a player in the last month I didn't know, honestly, that he was capable of being, like in December, early January. You think of the game he had like against Rutgers on senior night, when he was just such a live wire, and it was like any ball that was in the air was sort of his, it felt like. Remember, that came against Clifford Omarui, who had like 15 boards against Nebraska in Piscataway in a game earlier that year. And in that contest, they held him to like 2 rebounds. And Rutgers did get their share of offensive boards by the end of it. But when the game was sort of in the balance, Nebraska did a real good job there, comparative to their past game. So they have shown that they can kind of push back on the rebounding. They struggle at rebounding narrative sometimes. And even Saturday, I look back at the stats against Illinois. They were only -6, like at the end of it, like on rebounding, and it was 14-11 on offensive board. So it wasn't like this amazing disparity where they just got crushed, So if they can bring that and stay out of foul trouble more than they did on Saturday, that's a big part of it. Like, you can't have those dumb fouls. Like, yeah, I do agree the officiating was a little slanted at times, but like Juwan Gary's 4th foul was just a knick-knack bad decision by him. Alec had a couple that where it's all energy, but he got a couple fouls where maybe he can avoid them if you play it a little differently. So that's going to be an interesting part of this game with Alec. Like, can he be that live wire and have that just the ball is mine way about him, and also keep himself out of foul trouble along the way? That'll be important.
It like you kind of mentioned that stretch of games where Alex played, just kind of taking his play to another level. There's been games where Nebraska has played really good interior defense, like really good, and there's been games where they've just kind of looked a little bit disinterested.
Mm-hmm.
Is that matchup? Is it effort? Like what? Like when they're kind of humming along at their best, like it just seems to me like it's just more of an energy thing rather than anything else. I mean, because even against teams that are pretty good in the paint, they've had some good defensive efforts. I mean, is it just a matter of those guys showing up ready to go? Like, in your mind?
I think that's a piece of it, but also I just think like communication is a big part of it. Like, I think when you communicate really well and you just like completely understand, oh, okay, when the ball's going here on the floor, this guy goes here, and it happens just so seamlessly, and you know your plan so well. That's when they look really good. And then there have been times where I think they would say they didn't talk enough on defense. Like at Iowa, for example, was a game where Hoiberg said they didn't talk well. And you've really got to fight to the mental part. If a team, puts a 9-0 run and their side of the gym is making a lot of noise, like Illinois was doing on Saturday, Nebraska didn't punch back enough there. I felt like actually their struggles defensively and picking up the fouls sort of came over to the offensive end, where they started forcing the issue more than they normally do with some shots that I don't think this team normally takes when they're playing really well. And so I thought it kind of worked together where it was bad on both ends for like a 5-minute stretch. And sometimes that all it takes to be on the wrong end. Then, you have that drought or whatever. But yeah, I think communication will be huge in this one. And then you're going to need like your guards to crash in and get boards too. Like Bryce Williams at 6'7" got to have that length, play well in this game. I thought a sneaky storyline was Bryce was great. I thought like Friday, Saturday, and I actually voted him on the all tournament team. Casey ended up getting on there, and I understand because he had the heater at the end and was sort of the story of that, that moment. But if you think about the two games, like Bryce had 23 in each and was just like, I felt like keeping them where they needed to be. So if he has a big game, I would throw him with Alec as my two guys. Like, if they play really well, I think Nebraska will be very hard to beat Friday.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd agree with that. It always seems like in tournament games too that like how teams kind of navigate like basically the first two media timeouts. Like you need to be dialed in, and you kind of set the tone for the game. I mean, like it's like thinking back to when Nebraska was in the tournament 10 years ago. I mean, they were just completely out of sorts from the get-go. And you think, other games too. I mean, you got to show that you're, in it, you're focused and everything else, and get off to a good start. Do you think that like the way that game against Illinois kind of played out in some ways helps them going into this one? Because I don't know, maybe it kind of maybe took the wind out of the sails a little bit, and you kind of have to reset. I don't know. Like I guess like I can talk myself into that being an okay result, big picture, going into this one.
If people go back to our previous pod, we actually hit on this topic a bit with like, would an okay scenario without wanting it necessarily, but okay, let's whisper about it. If they played well Friday, played pretty well Saturday and lost, got to go home, recoup, you sort of have to wear it a little bit. Like it sometimes you see teams where it's kind of good. They got that loss off their chest where you're not trying to roll off like 9-game winning streak, that you're rolling in with and all that. And I could see where it could be useful. I think mostly though, it's that they just played a team who, like, A&M, if you count, is the top offensive rebounding team. But if you go just rebounds in general, they're 7th, I believe. And Illinois is 8th. So, I mean, they just got the team that's basically statistically like one they're going to see. So I think that is beneficial. And I go back to it. They didn't just get hammered on the boards like you would think. It wasn't like they're minus 15 or something like that. So if they can be a kind of around where they were statistically in rebounding against Illinois, I'm not saying you concede that you're going to be minus in that category, but if it's kind of close, I think Nebraska can negate it if they're shooting, semi well. Like if they can hit 9 threes or something like that.
Do we get a Casey moment in this game? Like, you know what I mean? Like, you had the heater against Indiana, and like it just in my dumb little mind, it just sets up so well. Like, you've got a late afternoon tip on a Friday. Everybody's heading home from work, sitting down in front of the TV, bellying up to the bar. They got TNT on there, and this kid from Nebraska, plays for Nebraska, from Japan, is just splashing jumpers from everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah.
I want that to happen for like 5 minutes. Like, it doesn't have to happen for a whole half, but just like one of those complete, like, unconscious shooting from everywhere stretch. That's all I want. That's all I want from this game.
Yeah, he doesn't need to score 40. Like the end of the Indiana game, or the end of the first half, he made 3 threes, and that was enough, just the way that it happened, to produce like what it did, like on social media and stuff, and obviously the last one was just, I mean, that was beautiful. It was like one of those walk-off shots, got to do a celebration. So I think everybody's hoping for it. I think the greatest dream is like Charles Barkley on Saturday. They like have him doing that interview, on CBS at a halftime of a game or something, and he's trying to pronounce Tomanaga's last name, and like everybody wants that. I think the good thing with Casey is there's a pressure to have that moment, but I've also thought about that. He like always has pressure on him because he has, Japanese media following him like every game, reporting his stat line back home and like how it went and stuff like this. So it's not like it's new to him, like having to individually produce and have it be under the microscope. So I think that's useful. I also think it can be Nebraska's advantage potentially if the other side gets so fixated on hearing about somebody where it's like got to shut off Tomaga, and then you realize, oh, Mass could hit 3 threes, or Bryce Williams could, go off for 22 or whatever.
Right.
And if Tomaga just plays a smart game and lets it come to him, with the shot selection and all that, then I think all the hype around him is of use no matter what his stat line ends up. It just comes down to him like not trying to force the issue, which I actually give him credit. I don't think he does as much as people sometimes act like. Like they act like he's such a gunner, and he will have heat check shots, but he's also had games where he's shot the ball like twice and a half, and passed it around. So he's definitely capable of being that guy if the space isn't like right there.
Yeah. How many media did he have following him around up in Minneapolis?
Oh, I believe I saw at least like 7 or 8, I think it's fair, Japanese media that were there, like waiting to interview him. And they might have been some of them from the same outlet. There might have even been more. But it was funny. Yeah. Like after Friday's game, like in the hall, there's like a line of media from his home waiting for their turn with him. And I mean, it's a fun story. That's why you hope it works like your imagination it has it right now, because everybody can see like what it could be. Remember that kid from Ole Miss too, who like went off of like, there's these story. He was kind of like Eminem a little bit.
Marshall,
Marshall, his name was Marshall too, I think.
Marshall Henderson, is that right?
Yeah, he went off for a couple in a couple games, and like those are the kind of things you love about March when that happens. But I think most importantly, if Nebraska wins, gives him a second chance to do it, like gives him 2 opportunities at it. There you go. There's your best scenario.
Do you think this team's like ready for this? Like, I mean, that's it's been 10 years. I mean, they know the narrative around here. I mean, I feel like Fred's kind of just measured approach is really helpful in like this kind of a situation. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like I'm always struck by like when he talks about his own playing career, just the depth of things that he'll go into about what it means to him. You can tell that like games that he lost still piss him off, even now. But I mean, the way that he talks about the NCAA tournament, I mean, I think he's kind of preaching it as like it's like a life changing opportunity in some ways for these guys, and something they'll always remember. But I don't know. I just think I think his approach is how you kind of have to do it in the NCAA tournament, because it keeps your team from being too just vibrating too much. Like it's just a really kind of calm approach.
I mean, the advantage is he's won as a head coach there. He's been to the Sweet 16. He took 4 Iowa State teams in. His first one that got in, that was a little bit of a build he had to do there. It happened quicker, of course, but his second year, they were an 8 seed, and they actually beat, I think they beat UConn, who was maybe the defending champs, not as good that year, but they beat them pretty handily and then lost in the second round. So I think I noticed that even when things were going really well, like in January and February, and it was trending toward they were going to be in the brackets, he always was pretty composed about it and not like just acting like, oh man, can you believe that happened? I mean, he always thought, I think this team was capable of maybe being in this spot.
Mm-hmm.
Things had to go right and guys had to gel, but I think he saw it way before anybody else, of course. So yeah, that can definitely help. And I noticed, like on Saturday, I went back and watched the CBS broadcast because I wanted to hear like what Raftery said and all that.
Company man.
Yeah, I am. And couple minutes into the game, and I think this is encouraging. I didn't know how Nebraska was going to respond on that stage. Like it's kind of a big deal. You step out there, and you're getting ready for the tip, and there's Grant Hill and Raftery, and you see that CBS logo over there, and it's like, okay, this is a different kind of TV setup. And Nebraska played really well, off the bat. And Raftery, like 2 minutes in the game, says, "This team's so relaxed, aren't they? Like their coach, And I thought like he could tell, like even a few minutes into the game, that this was a team that wasn't like just shaking in their sneakers about it, and they were just playing ball. And so hopefully that carries over into this one, because if they play with like the same sort of mental capacity they had against Illinois, I think they'll be fine too. Like it's just a matter of getting to that point. Of course, you never know. If you shoot like 4 of 32 from 3, you'll be done, So that's the way hoops goes sometimes. But I think because they're so veteran, that helps too. You've got enough guys, even though they haven't been in this particular setup, they've been sort of building their whole careers, like Mast and Bryce Williams, to be here and be in this moment. So hopefully they don't put too much weight on it, but just enough, and we'll see if they can find that right balance.
Anything else stand out about to you about the bracket in particular on Nebraska's in Nebraska's region? I mean,
What do you think?
You get Houston in round 2 potentially. I mean, I say potentially more so from Nebraska's and Texas A&M's end versus Houston's, but
you're sleeping on Longwood.
I am a little bit. I'm a little sleepy on the Lancers because I don't even know, they were like a mid seed in their own conference tournament. Like I think they kind of upset to get in.
They're the Lancers?
Yes.
I didn't know that. The heat is on. Do they play that when they get rolling?
I don't know. I think I would appreciate it if they did. And don't you for 1 second discount how Exarban used to rock on Friday nights. So
I was there. I was there
I
as a young lad.
know. I mean, anything else? I mean, you got Marquette as the 2. It's a little unfortunate that Nebraska didn't get to the 7 in that region, because you would have. I would have felt a lot better about seeing Marquette in the second round than I would have for a lot of the 2 seeds.
Yeah, and they could have still done their Nebraska Texas A&M joke 7-10 probably, and it would have made sense.
Yeah, I mean, the seeding doesn't matter anyways. You just move it around.
If you believe the overall seeding, I looked at the chart. Nebraska was 29, so that means they were the first 8 seed.
Yeah.
So yeah, had they won against Illinois, supposedly, we don't know, but they probably would have been in that 7. But yeah, I think the first round draw is good. I think the long view of like making a big run is challenging, because I think Houston's really good, and I know they got smoked by Iowa State in the Big 12 title game, and I think they have an injury or so. So maybe, maybe that lingers and they struggle and they don't get off the ground, but they're a tough team. The thing about Nebraska's bracket is basically they got lined up with just like 2 just rebounding horses of teams, like it's like,
Right.
which are the 2 teams that are like can give you the most problems, like with their rebounding, for a team that sometimes when it's gone way wrong, that's been the biggest issue. Well, here they are, have
Yeah.
at it.
Just
So
line
that's
them
what
up.
Nebraska got. So if I'm honest about it, and I think I've been pretty positive about how Friday can go, but like I don't love the second round game, and I think there are times you would say, well, when would you say that if you're a 7 or 8? Maybe you wouldn't, but that if they had gotten a 7, there are games where I would have like thought like, hey, anything could happen if Nebraska gets to the second round, and it still can. But I think it's a tough draw as far as getting through Memphis. But that's what's expected when you're like in 7 or 8 seed. And I think most people around the state are like, take care of that first one. Let's
Yeah.
enjoy that. I hope people, if that does happen, don't make it too much about the Trev thing and like throwing on that. And instead it's just like, this is the first one in school history. Let's celebrate that way. The other side of the bracket, it's got Marquette as the 2, Kentucky as the 3. People are kind of high on Kentucky making a run out of this bracket, I've noticed, because of their talent. They score a ton, give up a ton. They actually also lost to this A&M team at the SEC tournament. So that's one of A&M's better wins. So that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah. Wisconsin's in the bracket and that side, as well as the 5.
And Duke.
Duke's the 4. James Madison is kind of the everybody's kind of got that one circled. That you might see,
that's the game where you're
angry
supposed
Greg Gard after the first round game.
That's the one where you're supposed to show you're like a hoops head. You watch a lot of ball.
Yeah. Everybody's focused on Duke. You're focused on the James Madison Dukes. That's what you're if you're really like ball.
Yeah. I like when there's like a certain team that picks up steam every year in March.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, this is the upset.
Yeah.
I'd like a percentage that someone should do this story where they figure out like in the last 15 years, like who the upset team was from Sunday till the first game and like how they did. And it might be interesting. I don't know. Maybe they've won like 6 or 7 of the 15. But I think just as many times the 5 seed or whoever is getting crapped on all week, like is like, nah, that's not going to happen. And then they take it out on them. But James Madison, not bad for being 5'4", huh? Is that what he was?
Yeah, no, he surprisingly one of the more athletic presidents, apparently. Who knew?
Yeah.
Cat could ball. Anything else to get into before we sign off here? Maybe a little hoops preview podcast for Friday morning to get you through the workday.
I got a new case. The viewers should be let in on this. It's really interesting. I got a new case for my microphone, so I think that should happen from Memphis.
You get a little blues. You can play a little slide guitar in the background for us while we're talking tournament.
I don't think I'm hiding it. Like how I've always wanted Nebraska to cover a team. I didn't cover the 14 team. And then beyond that wasn't in the picture really. I did like back in the old newspaper days cover a couple like as a second guy like Barry Collier teams, but that never happened. So I've always thought like, man, if those guys could just get to this weekend and be part of it, like you go somewhere and you're watching the other games and like it's a fun thing. I like that they're playing Friday too. Like I like that there's some time for the tournament to marinate, like they're not playing at 11:30. It's cool if you win, but it really sucks if you play at 11:30 and you're done. And then
You're home by dinner time, and most of the teams haven't even played yet.
Yeah. And then you're like thinking of like Iowa's like playing in the NIT still like a week later or whatever.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that it's on Friday, and I think they got a cool site. I expect there'll be a decent number of Nebraska fans. There was a good following in Minnesota. Maybe if there's a benefit to the A&M thing, that fuels like a few extra buys of that. Like I'm doing it, I'm going.
I'm gonna drive down to Memphis and stick it to Trev.
I'm gonna give him a piece of my mind if I see him. So yeah, maybe that'll happen. And if that puts 50 more Husker fans in the seats, I guess there was the payoff.
Yeah, spite and comeuppance are big emotions.
You can't return, as they say in Seinfeld, you can't return wardrobe for spite, but maybe you can.
Get us out.
That's all. Oh, yeah, that's all I got. We'll end on the Seinfeld reference, but you should come back to Husker247 for all the latest. A lot of football stuff too. Spring ball starts at Sunday/Monday kind of. And Matt Rule had his press conference yesterday. Said a lot of interesting things too. The athletic director search goes on. Chris Kaborik, the interim president, weighed in there. That's on the site. So it's just everything's happening. Just come back to Husker247 and just keep clicking on it, because there's always going to be stuff going throughout the week. We appreciate you listening.